Want to talk about 16 ways to lose your license. Come on, you got to be excited about that. What do people do? Yeah, that was 50 ways to lose your lover. There's only 16 ways to lose your license. In the division, they're a little tighter. Um, Before we do that, though, I want to talk about an experience I had over the weekend. Had a had an agent give me a call and say, "Hey, my seller's went under contract. It's a high end home, and north of 1.5 million. And right after we went under contract, he got two more offers, and one of them was like for 60,000 more. What can he do to lose his buyer?" And I said, "Nothing." Because, and I use a dumb analogy. And so if you're good at dumb analogies or understanding them, then you're really good. But remember Robin Williams way back in the dark ages when he did Aladdin, Disney's Aladdin, right? And he said, whoever holds the lamp has phenomenal cosmic power, itty bitty living space, right? That's why we sell, because we have itty bitty living space. But whoever holds the lamp has the power. Sellers have all power. They can negotiate up the wazoo, right? They can say, gonna barter, I'm gonna ask for this and that. And buyers do the same thing. They're bargaining back and forth. They're negotiating. But as soon as the seller or the buyer accepts the final addendum or the REPC, that power shifts. The lamp gets handed from the seller to the buyer. Now, the buyer is going to determine whether or not that house will close. So this is where it got interesting. I get the call on Friday. The house went under contract on Wednesday. And the question was, earnest money is due on Sunday, right? What does Section 21 of the REPC say? Well, it's up above part one. It says 4 days for the agent to collect or to receive the earnest money, right? And then the broker has 4 additional days to deposit that money. So we're okay. It can happen over a weekend and all of that. Section 21 of the purchase agreement says that we're counting days. It starts when? Day one. If it went under contract Wednesday, what day is day one? Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Therefore, Sunday at 5 p.m. So the agent said, we're wondering if they're going to actually make that deposit before Sunday because there's only 2 business days. Then there's a long weekend. Some people take off early for that long weekend. And Dean, why are you telling this story? It's because one, if you're representing a buyer, you better make darn sure that you collect that earnest money quick. Because what if your seller got an offer that was better than yours? What happens Sunday at 5 p.m. in this scenario? It's nice and loud. Voidable. Yeah. It's voidable by whom? The seller. All of a sudden, there's a sneak peek where the seller can reach over, grab the lamp, and say, we're done. Okay. So yesterday morning, now it's Monday morning, listing agent calls the buyer agent and said, or it didn't call, wussed out and texted, "Hey, my seller wants a copy of your wire instructions showing that they went out in time because there was going to be a wire, it was a $20,000 deposit." He said, "Want to see your wire instructions?" And the buyer said, "Well, why?" "Because my seller wants them." And it ended up becoming a spitting match. But now here we're sitting, and this morning the buyer said, "We went into contract on a Wednesday. We had already left town on Tuesday, and we only had 2 business days to get it done. And I wanted to get the wire. So I have the funds ready and prepared, and we were going to wire first thing this morning." How many days late are we? 2 days late, right? Yesterday, the seller sent over through their agents instruction or cancellation notice of cancellation saying buyer did not perform, therefore the seller canceled. And so the seller was able to get out and to accept another offer on the property. And the buyer threatened and said, I'm suing, we're gonna, so whatever. But it's really clear. You hear the word statute of frauds. Those of you that are newer agents, what is statute of frauds? They beat you up about it in real estate school. At least they should have. What does it mean? It has to be in writing. What else? It's tied to dates, right? So I write an offer. Right now, my Spidey watch tells me that it's almost 10:20, and the acceptance deadline is 10:30. And I send my offer over to Greg. I'm just picking on Greg because he's here and he's convenient. Greg's a listing agent. And Greg, your seller has 10 minutes to accept this offer. What happens at 10:31 or 11:31, excuse me? No. It's an offer. I send an offer over. So it expires at 11:30. So what happens at 11:31? My offer has expired. What does Greg have to do to get that under contract? Yeah, he's going to counteroffer. Exactly. Because as crazy as it sounds, if the seller accepted at 10:31 and they time stamped it, they said we used DocuSign or we used Lone Wolf and we signed it, is it a valid contract? And when can somebody throw the flag? Let's say that Greg is the listing agent, and in this case he is. 10 days later, he throws the flag and says, yeah, the seller's going to void it because it wasn't accepted in time, so we never had a contract. Guess who the court's going to side with? They're going to side with Greg's seller because it was not really under contract. Now we're getting into some fine gray areas because people are acting themselves into a contract after 10 days. But the next day you could throw the flag. Yes. Saying that the seller accepts the offer and as is, and we want the buyer to confirm it, that everybody's in agreement, we're under contract.
If the buyer's agent, if the buyer had given the buyer's agent a check.
Yep. Check would have worked. They would have been okay. Here's the sad part. Buyer's agent was his own agent, the buyer was his own agent. Or the buyer was an agent, could have written a personal check and said, I have a check in hand. Never thought of that. And that's why the listing agent, at the instruction of their seller, waited until Monday morning to make that request. And could have said, yeah, I have a check in hand because I post-dated a check or redid that. Anyway, kind of crazy. There's a moral to the story, though, and I want to train on, I call it the higher law, if you will. The agent was really the buyer super frustrated because he's losing the house, and it was a house he's going to purchase for himself and his family. And he said, if you would have just picked up your phone, we could have had this discussion. And maybe that was tactical on the listing agent's part, but friends, would you please pick up your phones now and then? It is so important. I think we lose context in there. My seller is wanting to accept another offer. And that's why we're asking the question, where's the earnest money? Well, it's sitting in my account. I haven't written a check. First of all, if you're representing a buyer, will you make sure that don't wait until 4:50 p.m. We had $10,000 of earnest money get sent by instructions this morning to the seller because the buyers signed their cancellation document at 4:59 p.m. and it arrived and was emailed from the buyer's agent to the listing agent at 5 minutes after the hour. And the listing agent sent a note back and said, yeah, you're 5 minutes late. And the buyer agent's going, you sure? It's really hard. That was only $10,000. But it's a lot of it, when it's your buyer's money, if it's your money, oh well, because you don't care about 10 grand. But man, when it's your clients, you need to be careful. That's part of it. So when we talk about 16 ways to lose your license, I was just going to do one of 16 every day. I had 16 weeks worth of stuff, and then I got they called an audible. And so we're going to talk about at least the first way to lose your license. And so this is in the divisions. We can actually go to it. You can switch the screen over to that page. It's prohibited conduct as applicable to licensed individuals. And so the very first one, and it's funny, they're A through whatever the 16th letter of the alphabet is, and I'm not that smart. I had to go to the end to look at it. But A, you may not engage in any of the practices described in this section and the following sections, whether acting as an agent or on licensee's own account. So even if you're acting on for yourself, you may not, one, fail to conform with accepted standards of the real estate sales, leasing, or management industries. That's pretty broad. That's where complaints come in because, well, they didn't act within the scope of the industry. So that's important. I'm trying to sell a property in St. George, and I'm telling folks, oh, this is the best property to lease out for short-term rentals. And what if there are deed restrictions on that property? Somebody buys that property that says, you may not rent this property out for long-term rentals, let alone short-term rentals. Is that a problem? That was my first lawsuit back in 2010. The problem was the listing agent's the one who told our buyer that, but the buyer's attorney decided to sue everybody. And so the seller ended up making about $30,000 on it and had their 1031 exchange monies refunded to them. And the listing agent got to sell that property for free. So just be careful, making sure that you're conforming with standards. Know the business you're in. I have a lot of agents raising their hands saying, I want to do commercial. I'm saying, great. Then partner with a commercial agent. You're not allowed to go fly and be free on your own. Okay. And the reason being is you have to have competence in that area. And primarily we're working with residential properties. Number 2, you may not do something that could jeopardize the public health, safety, or welfare. Can you think of anything that might fall into that realm? Someone could say, they coughed on my child. My child contracted pneumonia and is in grave danger. So be careful. If you're sick, please don't come and share. It's not the season. If we were entering into the fall, I would say, yeah, if you're coughing and sniffling and it's because of you think a cold virus or possibly COVID or something along the flu strains that are available, please don't share. All right. And then I love this. You may not violate provision of Title 61 or any of the rules of this chapter. There's a lot of rules that the division has, but those are easy ways to lose your license. Come on, is this exciting or what? Let's go to the next ones. Let's look at it. Say again. Yes. Some of them committed felonies. If you make the division newsletter, right? I lovingly refer to that as the centerfold of the division newsletter. And you're on that. That's a problem. Now, they don't usually bug you anymore about, oh, they had a speeding ticket and so it was considered a misdemeanor. Those don't show up anymore. But if you're finding yourself in a situation where you're pleading no contest or plea in abeyance, because you had to go to court for something, there's a chance you'll end up in the division newsletter. And that's not very fun. Let's talk. Is it okay? Go ahead, Amber. Come here, use your mic just because.
Okay. I could yell, but sneak peek at the new Rep C that is going to be coming out this fall. The notice of cancellation and the notice of acceptance are going to be in line where received is the new requirement. Right now, the requirement is only accepted has to be communicated. It's going to be consistent now. So received by the listing agent or by the buyer's agent is going to be the new timeline. Yeah. So that's new. That's big. It's a big change.
Yeah, there's going to be some fun changes. I heard all the dates are going to be on the front page. Yeah, on page 1 of the Repsy, so it's not hidden on page 6. Anyway, there are so many. Now, I think that's an improvement, but has the Repsy changed dramatically? Probably not. It's just these are going to be some tweaks that we're going to have to get used to and figure it out. Mercifully, we're still not 16 pages like a California Repsy, because they try to put every single possible twist and turn because somebody got sued and lost. What's one of the obvious things that this brokerage doesn't allow that most brokerages do allow? Dual agency, where you're representing the buyer and the seller on the same transaction. There are some that do, and they do so with permission after we have a conversation of why is it important to do so. A lot of times it has to do with you already have relationships with the buyer and the seller. When I have conversations with my buyers, I literally let them know, if you fall in love with one of my listings, you just agree to be unrepresented on this one house. You know, I'm going to be working for both of you, but I represent legally the seller because I can't enter into that. Don't tell me anything you don't want the seller to know on that. There are certain things that I'm just telling you, dual agency is right now, it's on the FTC's radar. Federal Trade Commission is from the federal side of things, they're going to be beating that one up. There are some that want to take it so far to saying that a brokerage must be either a listing brokerage or a selling brokerage. You can't be both. Now that's a little bit crazy. I think that's extreme. In other words, they say the broker can't be reasonable to Shoney's buyer and Randy's seller. Yeah, they're saying it has to be 2 separate brokerages to do that, to make that happen. Anyway, mercifully, that's not the case thus far. That's not on the radar, but it's coming. Let's go back pre-August 17, 2024. Some of you weren't licensed. What was promised on the MLS back in the day? That we used to talk about, what is the value of the MLS, the multiple listing service? It's our marketplace. What are the 2 C's? Cooperation and compensation. And they used to talk about, oh, there's money that will be paid. Is that right? See, Amber knows this because she and I are old in the business and we get it. But I want you to think about it for a second, because this happened in this brokerage, and I'm going to a code of ethics hearing Monday about it. We have a listing agent in the brokerage. Listed a property went up for sale, and 3 offers came in, and it went under contract. During that time, a buyer agent from out of town was showing a buyer around and wanted to show that property, scheduled a showing, and it was approved. And so she was excited to show it to her buyer, and then notified about 10 minutes later, hey, this property went under contract, so it's not available. She canceled the showing and moved on, and they were going to look at other properties. About 2 weeks later, the property fell out of contract. Has that ever happened to anyone here? The property falls out of contract. Well, listing agent happens to be a team lead, but had a sign writer on the house. So the buyer, that same buyer, drove by the house, said, ooh, this has a house I wanted before, but I didn't get to see it. So he calls on the sign, schedules an appointment to show it. Buyer agent from the team here with KW said, hey, I want to show, You've asked to show the property. Can we schedule a time? Yep, we can. Before they went in, he said, we have new rules of engagement now. So what I want you to think about is what has changed? What are the responsibilities of that buyer agent? Okay, so just ask yourself as we're going through this process. He said, here's a buyer broker agreement. It's set up for 1 day. It expires in 24 hours and it's limited to this property alone. Only this property. Because I don't want to tie you to someone else. Now, have you signed a buyer broker or are you working with another agent? No, I'm not working with another agent. The buyer signs, buyer agent signs, they go and tour the property, buyer falls in love. They write an offer and it goes under contract before that 24-hour period is done. Is there anything wrong right now with this picture? Okay, because the buyer agent is ignorant of the original buyer broker that was signed and is moving forward. Fast forward 10 days. We're now 10 days away from closing. It's a cash deal. And this yellow flag comes flying in from left field. And an agent says, my buyer, we have a buyer broker. And we go, we didn't know that there was a buyer broker. And he goes back, my agent goes back to the buyer and says, what's going on? I didn't realize I signed such a document. And the problem is, I still want to close. So you be the judge just for a second. You be the broker too. What do you do with this buyer? What are the problems if we cancel the agreement and have him sign another agreement with another buyer, with the original buyer agent? What are some of the risks? Say again. Good. Say it nice and loud. I'm sorry.
The whole deal falls through.
Well, the deal could fall through, but how? How can the deal fall through? And what's the process? What should a buyer agent do? Ultimately, the buyer chose to close with KW Westfield, got the house he wanted, and the agent filed a complaint with the Division of Real Estate that the KW agent stole a buyer's and interfered with a contract. Now, the problem is the state says, and the Code of Ethics says, you have to knowingly interfere with a contract. But come back now. What are some of the risks to that buyer? If the buyer says, let's cancel it, what could happen in the meantime? Yeah, another offer could come in. That's dangerous. What if you're a seller? I'm thinking like those selfish sellers, always looking for more. What could they say in today's world? How are buyer agents compensated? Generally, in today's, so we ask the seller to cover, so that between the buyer and the seller, we say, hey, seller, we'd like you to compensate my agent Shoni because I want to buy this house and I don't want to pay the extra dollars out of pocket if I'm paying market value for a property, do I want to go down that path? And so what could the seller say? Oh no, I'm not paying. I was going to pay this other brokerage, but I'm not going to pay your second broker because I know you want the house. And I also know you have cash. Did it change? Could it change? It's an interesting argument. Now, as a broker, I said, I'm not canceling. Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
The buyer misrepresented that they had signed an earlier BBA.
Yeah.
So can't our brokerage go after that buyer?
We could, but I'm going to tell you right now, as a buyer's broker, even as a listing broker, I'm probably not going to go and sue my client just because of the optics of it. Now, the other buyer agent could go after the buyer and say, buyer, you messed up. And so here's, I'll fast forward and get through it all. I sent a note and it made the other broker really mad, made the agent mad, but said, your problem is not with KW Westfield. Your problem is with your buyer. Your buyer obligated himself to 2 brokerages, and you actually can. Now, with the code of ethics, I can knowingly put Shoney under a second buyer's broker agreement as long as I inform him that he has a second buyer broker agreement and he's willing to pay us a commission and his former brokerage a commission. That's actually authorized in the code of ethics. Now, Shoney would be a fool to do such a thing, and Shoney's is nobody's fool, and he's not doing that, right? But we would have to, but if we knew about it, we would have to inform him. We didn't know about that. And that's why we said it. And it's actually the language on the agreement, it says on the buyer broker agreement, buyer warrants that he has not entered into any such agreement, except for those specifics listed below. I remember when we first started doing this back in 2024, after August 17, I literally sat down with the buyer and I said, where are you guys looking? Well, we're looking up in Cache County and we're looking here in Utah County. And they were a referral. And I said, great. I want nothing to do with Cache County. Is that okay if you'll exclude Utah County from the Cache County agent? I said, oh yeah, we'll do that. And so they said they did that. And then when they signed a buyer broker with me, it was limited to Utah County. Now that buyer knew that they were obligated to me for Utah County. And if they didn't do what they were supposed to do in Cache County and obligated themselves to it, not my problem. Because I have agency. And here's where it's hard. Agency means what? I have a fiduciary duty to my client. I don't want to cost my client more money, because those end up getting sent to the Division of Real Estate. And if I'm not satisfied there, I'll go to the Code of Ethics and see if we can get them to slap a fine on somebody. But you have to knowingly enter into agency. Agency is a big deal. In fact, it'll come up, and it could still come up, that you get to take some additional CE without getting credit for it regarding agency. Usually it'll be a Code of Ethics type of a class where they talk about who has agency. Those are just some of the things we can get ourselves in hot water on. Yeah.
And the agent can do forward, you just claim procurement cause.
Okay, what's the definition of procuring cause? So the question was, could you claim procuring cause and do that? So first one, I'll say no on 2 different counts. In the environment in which we live today, procuring cause was done away with once it came off, compensation came off of the multiple listing service. Prior to August 17 of 2024, procuring cause was what they would start going, procuring cause, I had the earlier buyer broker. You're correct. And so what we're fighting about wasn't over who gets to represent the buyer, it's who gets that commission. And so a lot of times the agents, and this is where I think what's the difference between now and back then, I submit that there's no difference. But the practice was, and Amber, had you ever seen it prior to 2017 where 2 agents were working with the same buyer? Not you, but you've seen it. Okay. What happened to agent number 2? What did agent number 2 typically do? They'd walk away because there's no compensation for representing that buyer. Okay. How is it different today? Who negotiated with the seller on the scenario that I described to you? Who negotiated with the seller compensation for the listing, for the buyer's brokerage? The buyer agent negotiated that. And so the buyer negotiated, I should say the buyer negotiated with the seller for compensation for KW Westfield, not for brand X. And so When you have an agent come say, I'm procuring cause for what? Because you didn't procure anything. Right? Literally. Now the other side, let's define procuring cause. It's literally defined legal in legal journals. It'll say it's an uninterrupted series of events that took place that led to a sale. Was there an interruption? Yeah, there was a big interruption. New buyer agent got involved. Is it possible if I dropped a buyer and said, hey, you close it, or I tried to change agency by addendum, which takes a little bit more because now I need broker signatures in addition to principals signatures in the contract to accept that. Is it possible the seller would say, yeah, I'm not doing this? And you could have lost, the buyer could have lost the house that he or she wanted or they wanted. And you see, to me, this is fascinating stuff as you can dig into the weeds a little bit, but you can lose the buyer under the current scenario and in the past scenario. The buyer could have lost the house. The seller could have had a better offer come in, made $60,000 more. Rates could have changed, and so timing got messed up. Something could have changed where the buyer may not have gotten the house. Under both scenarios, did I, as a broker, when we said, hey, we're going to go and you guys go ahead and close it, did I jeopardize the brokerage by releasing that buyer? And it took me a weekend because that question was asked of me on a Saturday. Well, how has agency and your responsibility changed? And I eventually called her back. I called the investigator back and said, I want to amend my response. It's not about the commission. It's about my agency and my responsibility to take care of that buyer. Because I had a fiduciary, a money responsibility to that buyer. What was really ironic was we did send a commission check up, a referral fee. We sent a referral fee. A shared commission. We shared 25% of the commission because that's what she offered. We said, but you can't offer that because you don't have a commission. And so it's different. We live in a different world. Now and she cashed it in November. So they waited a couple of months before they cashed the check, but they did cash the check. And that's enough to say, you know what, it's moot at this point. You even took the money on that. Anyway, you guys are going, oh, Crandall, this is like watching paint dry. I know. But this is the kind of stuff that it gets me excited. I love this stuff here. Let's talk about this. This is a fun way to lose your license. Require parties to acknowledge receipt of a final copy of any document prepared by the licensee before each party has signed a contract evidencing agreement to the contract terms. Now, back in the dark ages, when I first got started, Amber and I remember this, and those of you who've been in the business for more than 20 years would remember this. Contracts were in triplicate. They were in paper. And on the bottom of the REPC was a document receipt built in. And up until just recently, they were built into I think they're still built into the commercial agreement. It's still built in. But you'd have your buyer go ahead and sign receipt of that. They got a copy of the docs, of executed documents, even before I sent the document to the listing agent, before we faxed it to the listing agent. Yeah, I know. What is this thing you call fax? But if you're in real estate, it was just the fax, ma'am. But it's interesting. So this one's not as much of an issue, but to have someone say, oh yeah, I got all my docs before you even were under contract, that's a problem. So that's a way to lose your license. Don't do that. Items. This is the third one. And I think we're going to end on this just because. Make a misrepresentation to the division in an application for license renewal or in an investigation. Those are two places where you can lie to the division, lose your license. Is that fair? Now there are some things you're supposed to do. How long do you have to notify, how long do you have before you notify the division that you've moved? I just bought a new house. We're excited. 10 days. So on day 12, you go to the division's website. Yes, that was a good high five back there. That's a team. Now it's super easy, but you had to fill out a form, send it in to the division, say, hey, I moved. So here's my address of record. Now, the beautiful thing is on the division's website, you can go into your license and just do a change of address. How many agents forget to do that? Okay. I was in my place for about 2 months and I thought, I didn't move. However, my address for communication is this building. So it helped when I get letters from them. But they're not going to go on. The division doesn't care. But if you don't tell them, or you say, oh, I moved, I now live in, I bought that $205,000 house in Eureka. And I didn't tell them, and they've been sending mail to my American Fork address, and I'm not responding. That's on me, not on them. Makes sense? So, but I can't lie and say, oh yeah, I just moved here 3 days ago. And you're lying to the Division of Real Estate. Don't do it. In your application, it says, do you, have you committed any misdemeanors over the last 2 years? I just renewed my license. And so I had to think long and hard. Mercifully, no tickets. And so that's the only thing I could think of in my life that I had interaction with the police. Okay, so I was okay and I did not lie on that. But understand, they're like Big Brother. They're always watching and they will find you if you don't report. And so don't lie to the Division of Real Estate. Those are good ways to do it. Anyway, we'll do more and all that. We won't spend near as much time. Thank you for putting up with my bad jokes and thanks for listening. I hope that it made you think a little bit though on how you interact with other agents. We are so quick to text. We are so darn quick to just use an email and send flames back and forth. All of those become evidence if there's an investigation, by the way. All of those become something that you need to have documentation of if there's a code of ethics violation. You need to have those communications and keep copies of them. And so I would encourage you to be kind and always put everything in context when you're using your communications, because you don't know which file you're working on that you're going to have to report on it later. I promise you, if you pick up the phone and we talk and have a conversation, it's usually a whole lot more pleasant. Now, it may not be good news, but it's like, hey, I am really sorry my buyer had to back out, but I wanted just to call and let you know. Instead of, what's this notice of cancellation about? Does that make sense? There's a big difference on how messages can be received. Now, you could be having a really bad day, and it's made a whole lot worse when you get bad news. And your mindset may not be right where you want it. So anyway, I encourage conversations. This used to be a whole lot more of a communicative business. We have to be so much better at it. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. That's all we have for today. We appreciate Security National for lunch, and go get them. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you, Dean. Great stuff. Raise a hand if you're in bold right now. Keep your hand raised. I know you have some homework. Who's hit their 100 contacts? Oh, all right. Nice. Luke, good job. You've got today to do your to catch up, right? We meet tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. So be here sharp. For those of you who are going through bold, congratulations on taking that next step. One thing is just be here on time, and actually even early next week. We've got a special guest speaker. We've got Josh Romney coming in, and we'll have a really good conversation around what's happening in Utah and just some good perspective on the market. So be here Tuesday, 11 a.m. But Security National and Austin's team, thank you all for being here. and enjoy lunch. And we'll see you guys in Bold tomorrow.